Since the national lockdown at the end of March, schooling has been interrupted and some pupils have not set foot in a classroom for over 4 months. This has forced some in our society to turn to remote online learning, but with the high levels of inequality, the reality is that most pupils have not had learning since March. Has COVID-19 exposed inequality and the technological divide in our country and in the education sector? And what needs to be done to bridge the gap? And to talk to us about this is education expert and professor at Stellenbosch University, Jansen. Prof, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Let's talk about, the divide that has been caused around this time. Our viewers tonight are talking about connectivity and its importance, but as we speak, there are some pupils that have not seen an inside of a classroom and have not even been able to learn.
Yeah, there's basically 3 categories we found in our research. There are the children in the privileged schools who have what they call fully online learning. So there's a seamless transition from face-to-face teaching in the schools to online learning after the lockdown. Then at the other extreme are the children who have absolutely no access to data or devices and are basically had no education, formal education, so to speak. They may or may not have had access to broadcast learning, which is not really aligned with the CAPS curriculum and happens at odd hours of the day or night, etc. So those are the children, the majority, that are really, really badly exposed during the lockdown. And then in the middle, there's students who might have their own cell phones or their parents' cell phone, and may or may not have data and may or may not have connectivity throughout the day. And there, very often, the teachers would form WhatsApp groups and download content. I call it dumping content. And the students would upload assignments and so on and so forth. But that's very much dependent on the connectivity that may or may not be available at all times of the day. To summarize, the lockdown will definitely, regardless of what we do, increase, over the long term, the unequal academic outcomes for 20% of our schools. Compared to the 80% that gets left behind. And that's a terrible, terrible tragedy for South Africa.
And Prof, let's look at the adjustment of the calendar by the Department of Basic Education. Did that help at all?
No, the calendar is irrelevant at the moment. I've said from the beginning the department should simply have closed the schools for the year, and in terms of the regular academic calendar, and try to figure out what alternative education program to put in place so that the closing of the school doesn't mean the termination of education. And the only grade we really need to worry about is the grade 12s, and there we can make plans, even if they're right in January, to be able to provide them with structured teaching and support in schools that should be more or less empty. So the government didn't do that, okay? They're still struggling to find out how they can complete large sections of the CAPS curriculum. And that's extremely dangerous on the one hand, because we do not have in South Africa the conditions in the majority of our schools that can mitigate the effects of the virus. That is a fact. And secondly, we're putting teachers at risk. It's not, children don't go to school on their own, and they go to school and go home. They are vectors for the disease. We now know that from research. So this whole idea of trying to salvage the academic year was a mistake from the very beginning, but the department is so stubborn and indeed so reckless that they are quite prepared to put, if your child is at a fancy school, you're fine. They can have small classes, they got the space and they got the resources, and they can make sure that you have all these supporting, But even there, a child goes home to elderly grandparents or a father with diabetes, whatever the case might be, and they are spreaders of the disease, especially older children. So we have a government that has been, in my view, completely inept at managing this crisis, and that has terrible consequences, not just for education, but for health.
And Prof, let's talk about, the similarities then between these particular pupils that you looked into in this research. They're all showing signs of emotional distress. Why is that?
Okay, so we put together a book. We got 640 children's stories from around the 9 provinces and a couple outside of the continent. And we chose 400 of those stories to showcase in a book called Learning Under Lockdown, which should be in CNA stores next week. And by the way, all the proceeds of that book go towards school feeding schemes. Nobody makes money out of the book except the schools benefit. Anyway, what this book of 400 stories told us was, on the one hand, the enormous struggles that kids from grade 1 all the way to grade 12 go through because of the uncertainty, because of the threat to their lives, children whose parents are essential workers, and that kind of thing. So there's this enormous anxiety, stress, fear, hopelessness, etc. But the other side of those stories is an incredible resilience among these young people. Almost every story tells you how to cope in a pandemic. And so it's a story both of despair but also of hope. And we're hoping that, in the 9 provinces, all the schools will use this book of children's real stories in life orientation, for example, instead of teaching them the nonsense they do at the moment, and make sure that our children are better fortified, strengthened, because when you understand that other children have the same experiences that you do and the same hopes that you do, then you feel stronger, you feel more connected, and you feel more hopeful. So those are the 2 big stories or lessons from these children's stories.